My name's John Herring. I actually live in Preston, Connecticut, which is about 15 miles from New London here, and have been a member of Spark for a year and a half, about, I guess, something like that. So most of what I've done so far for myself has been in the woodworking shop, and I've helped out in various areas from painting and building and moving stuff, whatever needs to be done. Strong back, weak mind sort of thing. I grew up in a family where people did stuff. So it was everything from I grew up with a father who was an engineer who would rebuild automatic transmissions in the kitchen. And we, gardened and we did canning and freezing and made our own jams and jellies and did a lot of that and raised a lot of our own food. I had five sisters, so they and my mother made most of their own clothing. So I grew up around people. Everyone always had projects of a wide variety. I'm one of those. I am not one of those people who has one thing. I get my fingers into all kinds of things. With the access here, the woodworking is great because I don't have all those tools. I've also done stained glass, although not here, and miscellaneous other stuff. I used to do a lot of technical theater, building sets and designing and all the rest of that sort of thing. So a pretty broad range of stuff. And I tend to be more interested in learning about it and trying some ideas, that sort of thing, rather than becoming absolutely expert in one particular thing. I'm more interested in the broad spectrum stuff. At one point, I used to work on an assembly line in a factory, and although I was assembling stereo cabinets with classic Mediterranean styling, as they said, I didn't consider that particularly makerly. You were doing the same. I was putting the same 12 screws in each one as it came down the assembly line. That's that. But I think that applying some creativity to pretty nearly everything, whether it be, making a salad or, the more traditional crafts or arts. The creativity is what makes it, I guess, the individuality. So that's sort of the rough and ready way I think about it, I guess. There's the specific people who come in and have a specific goal. I want to learn whatever, drawing or stained glass work, or I have this idea I've always wanted to write a novel, whatever it happens to be. There's the people who have those specific goals. There's the people who just simply sort of want to try different things. And that different thing may be stained glass this month, and in 3 months they may say, okay, that was interesting, but I know enough about it that I want to move on to try something else, to try some of the electronics work. You have to approach it with an attitude of openness and say, I want to try something new. And new is scary. And I think that's part of it. For many people, I think one of the things that's nice about a makerspace is individuality. That instead of having the standard, I went to the store and bought this, you have something that is unique. That you made or that you adapted, that has something, so that it's not simply one of 18 billion. So an openness to exploring, I think, is probably key. Without that, they're probably not going to walk through the door to start with. With that, you can foster it and channel it and challenge it. But I think that openness to exploring, which means in part that the makerspace has some responsibility to make people feel like it's okay to try something, and the process is important. The product is a secondary thing. It's okay to try something and say, well, that didn't work. Very few people, are fabulous at something the first time they try it. And so it's a process. And that's something else that the organization can do, is provide support for people to realize that they are learning and getting better at something, even if the end result doesn't look all that wonderful at the moment. The first draft of my screenplay, the three people who were reading it all fell asleep by page 4. Okay, that's probably a sign that you need some additional work. Doesn't mean it's hopeless. It means you need to work on it more. And the first table I made, 3 of the legs were about the same height. Well, fine. So you're making progress. As you start moving into things that are not corporeal, I think that there the collegiality and community become important. A lot of things that you can do just sitting by yourself, whatever, can benefit by having reactions from other people, bouncing your ideas, hearing other people's thoughts, getting different perspectives, at times being sort of pushed by other people. I will say one of my other interests, I started taking lessons ages ago in singing and became a semi-pro opera singer. And when I was taking lessons, I was working full time in a totally different field. And if I had a whatever Tuesday night lesson, I'd come home and kick my shoes off and go, ugh, I really don't feel like doing this. Knowing that I had that lesson pushed me to practice and to work on things. And so having that external pressure was really, really helpful. And I think that for people who are probably more driven than I am, having just simply the opportunity to discuss with other people, to bounce ideas, is really, really helpful. So, yeah, I think that there's some potential there. I think one of the difficulties a makerspace has to deal with is how to avoid trying to be all things to everyone. Where do you set the limits? And I think each group winds up with a different solution to that. But I would argue that one way to look at it is to say, is it being done somewhere else? Convenient. Is it? Would this be redundant? And since there's so much to be doing, you have to find some sort of way to limit things, making sure that it doesn't devolve into a club for one group of people, that it is in fact open and that it shifts, and has potential for a broad range of people with a broad range of interests. I think that's a problem that all volunteer organizations face. Um, and I think that there's probably no one size fits all answer. Amongst the partial answers, people need to feel that their work is appreciated. And that's not necessarily a plaque at the annual meeting. It's more often, it's sort of the informal, wow, thanks for pulling that off, or, for your assistance on that. I think that there's a natural tendency to look and say, okay, in this organization, we have a board of 13 members. These 4 people really are good and do things. Let's load them up. And we won't give it to Joe because Joe never does things on time. Well, great. That means Joe gets away with saying that he's a board member and doesn't do anything. Whereas Tom, Dick, and Harry, or, Harriet and Alphonse and whoever, wind up burning out. So you need to be careful not to over rely on the people who are dedicated. I think that's one problem, and that means, I know in my case with organizations I worked on, I've switched jobs. I've gone from being on the board responsible for this to saying, okay, I'll be on the board again next year, but doing something different, because that helped me to stay fresh. And periodically I've said, okay, I'm off the board because the board needs to have a different perspective. I still care, but I want the board to have flexibility. And so I think paying attention and not overloading the people who are the workhorses, but working to support and encourage more people to get involved. Um, it's easy. The transaction costs are horrible. It's easier to have three people who get together and say, okay, here's how our membership drive or fundraising drive is going to go. That's way easier than getting 20 people together to do some of it. In the long run, having 20 people do it makes the organization stronger. Um, it's really painful to get to that long run. But in my experience with volunteer organizations, that is the way to do it. You know, it's not, it doesn't just magically appear, unfortunately. Cheerful note to end on.